The phone call came at 2:47 a.m., jolting me awake in my Chicago hotel room. My mother's voice, trembling with what I first thought was grief, delivered words that would shatter everything I believed about my family. "Michael, your father had a heart attack. He's in the hospital." A pause, then softer, almost guilty, "But there's something else. Something I should have told you years ago." I was already reaching for my pants, my pilot's training kicking in during crisis. "Mom, whatever it is can wait." "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's in Denver." "But Michael, listen to me. Robert isn't your real father." The words hit me like turbulence at 30,000 feet. I stopped moving, phone pressed against my ear, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was some cruel joke brought on by stress. The silence stretched between us like the Great Plains below my usual flight path. "What are you talking about?" "Your real father is James Morrison. He's here with me now. We're driving to the hospital together. 26 years of my life, and this is how I find out the man who taught me to throw a curveball, who worked double shifts at the Ford plant to pay for my flight school, who never missed a single one of my high school football games even when he was dead tired, isn't my biological father." But let me start from the beginning, because this story begins long before that phone call, in a small town outside Detroit where dreams were as scarce as good-paying jobs. My mother, Sarah, was barely 17 when she met Robert Patterson. He was 21, fresh out of trade school, with calloused hands and a smile that could light up the entire high school gymnasium during basketball games. Sarah was the prettiest girl in Dearborn Heights, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that made every boy in town stumble over their words. They met at a 4th of July barbecue in 1995. Sarah was there with her girlfriends, Robert was there with his work crew from the auto plant. According to family legend, he spent the entire evening working up the courage to ask her to dance, and when he finally did, neither of them sat down for the rest of the night. By October, Sarah was pregnant. The responsible thing to do, everyone said, was get married. Robert didn't hesitate. He loved Sarah with the kind of fierce devotion that small-town boys reserve for their first real love, and the idea of raising a family with her made all those double shifts and dirty work clothes seem worthwhile. They had a simple ceremony at the local courthouse in February 1996, with Sarah 3 months along and glowing in a borrowed white dress. Robert's parents gave them the down payment for a small house on Maple Street, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a basement where Robert could work on cars to make extra money. I was born in August 1996, a healthy 8-pound baby with my mother's green eyes and what everyone said was Robert's stubborn chin. Those first few years were tough but happy. Mom stayed home with me while attending nursing school part-time at Wayne County Community College. Robert worked at the Ford Rouge plant, starting as a line worker and slowly climbing his way up to floor supervisor. I have vivid memories of those early years. Robert teaching me to ride a bike in the driveway, his steady hand on my back as I wobbled forward. Him showing me how to change oil in his Mustang, explaining each step with the patience of someone who truly loves to teach. Weekend fishing trips to Lake Huron, where we'd sit in comfortable silence for hours, and he'd tell me stories about his own father, who'd worked the same plant for 37 years. When I was 7, Mom graduated nursing school and got a job at Detroit Medical Center. The commute was long, nearly an hour each way, but the pay was good and it meant we could start saving for my college fund. Robert was so proud of her, bragging to his work buddies about his wife the nurse, showing off her graduation photo to anyone who'd look. But then came the opportunity that would change everything. Mom was offered a position in the cardiac surgery unit at University of Colorado Hospital in Denver. It was a prestigious job, exactly the kind of career advancement she dreamed about. The only catch was that it required additional training, a 2-year program that would mean relocating to Denver. I'll never forget the family meeting we had at the kitchen table, the 3 of us sitting around the same Formica surface where I'd done homework and eaten countless bowls of cereal. Mom spread out brochures and papers, explaining the opportunity with excitement lighting up her face. Robert listened quietly, asking practical questions about housing, about my schooling, about whether the plant would hold his job. The decision, when it came, showed exactly the kind of man Robert was. This is too good to pass up, Sarah. We'll make it work. But making it work meant sacrifice. Robert couldn't leave his job at the plant, not with the seniority he'd built up and the pension he was counting on. So Mom and I moved to Denver, while Robert stayed in Michigan, flying out to visit us every other month and hosting us back home during my school breaks. For 2 years, our family lived split between 2 time zones. I adapted the way kids do, making new friends in Denver while counting down the days until I could see Robert again. He never complained, never made Mom feel guilty about the separation, even though I could see the loneliness in his eyes during our video calls. Those visits were everything to me. Robert would arrive at Denver International Airport with a worn duffel bag and gifts he'd been saving up to buy, always something he'd made in his workshop or found at garage sales. He taught me to ski at Winter Park, even though he'd never been on skis before in his life. He took me to Rockies games at Coors Field, cheering loudly in his Detroit Tigers cap and not caring about the strange looks from Colorado fans. During the summers the first spent back in Michigan, Robert and I fell into our old rhythms. He'd pick me up from Detroit Metro Airport, and we'd drive home through familiar streets while he caught me up on neighborhood gossip and asked about my grades. Those summers felt like coming home to myself, to the part of me that belonged to small-town Michigan and the smell of his workshop and the sound of baseball games on the radio. When Mom finished her program, she was offered a permanent position at Colorado Hospital. By then, I was starting high school, and the idea of moving back to Michigan felt impossible. All my friends were in Denver, and I'd been accepted to a magnet program for students interested in aviation. Robert made another sacrifice, accepting a transfer to a GM plant in Colorado Springs so our family could be together again. The transition wasn't easy for him. At 42, starting over in a new plant meant giving up the seniority and relationships he'd built over 15 years. But he did it without complaint, throwing himself into community involvement in our new town, coaching Little League and volunteering at church functions. High school was when I really started to appreciate Robert for who he was. While my classmates dealt with absent fathers or step-parents who didn't care, I had a dad who showed up for everything. Every football game, every award ceremony, every parent-teacher conference. When I decided I wanted to be a pilot, Robert spent his weekends driving me to air shows and small airports, talking to pilots and mechanics who could give me advice. He was the one who helped me fill out applications for the Air Force Academy, even though the idea of me in the military scared him. When I was accepted, he drove me to Colorado Springs for orientation, carrying my bags and shaking hands with officers while his eyes filled with pride. I always knew you'd do something special, Michael, he told me that day. You've got more potential than this old plant worker ever dreamed of. Academy life was demanding, but I thrived. Every weekend I was allowed off base. I drove home to have dinner with Mom and Robert, to do laundry and eat Mom's pot roast and listen to Robert's stories about work. He'd started volunteering as a youth baseball coach, and his stories about trying to teach 8-year-olds how to slide into second base always made me laugh. After graduation, I was stationed at Peterson Air Force Base, flying cargo missions across the Pacific. Mom and Robert moved to a larger house in Colorado Springs to be closer to me, and Sunday dinners became a weekly tradition. Robert would cook his famous barbecue ribs, and we'd sit on the back deck talking about everything and nothing. It was during one of those dinners that I met Jennifer, a flight attendant who was dating one of my fellow pilots. She was smart, funny, and completely unimpressed by my attempts to show off. 6 months later, I was stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California, and Jennifer transferred to United Airlines to be closer to me. We got married 2 years later, in 2019, with Robert walking Mom down the aisle and giving a toast that made everyone cry. He talked about watching me grow up, about being proud to call me his son, about how Jennifer was gaining not just a husband but a family that would always have her back. Jennifer and I settled in Sacramento, where I transitioned to commercial aviation with Delta Airlines. Robert and Mom came to visit whenever they could, and Robert spent hours in my garage helping me restore a 1967 Camaro I'd bought as a project car. Every man needs something to work on with his hands, he'd say, teaching me the same lessons about patience and precision that he'd learned at the plant. When Jennifer got pregnant in 2021, Robert was over the moon. He started building a crib in his workshop, sanding and staining each piece with the careful attention he brought to everything he did. When our son David was born, Robert held him with the gentle confidence of someone who'd been waiting his whole life for the moment he became a grandfather. "He's got your mother's eyes," Robert whispered, rocking David while Jennifer slept, "and hopefully your stubborn streak. He's going to need it in this world." For 3 years, life was perfect. I was flying international routes for Delta, Jennifer was working part-time and loving motherhood, and Robert and Mom visited every few months. David adored his grandfather, running to the door whenever he heard Robert's truck in the driveway. Then came that phone call at 2:47 a.m., the one that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my family. I caught the first flight from Sacramento to Denver, my mind reeling during the entire 2-hour journey. Robert in the hospital with a heart attack was terrifying enough, but Mom's revelation about my real father kept playing on repeat in my head. Who was James Morrison? Why was he with my mother? And why was she telling me this now, when Robert was fighting for his life? The Denver airport was a blur of hurried steps and racing thoughts. I caught a taxi to St. Mary's Hospital, checking my phone obsessively for updates. Mom had texted twice, "He's stable," and "I'm in the cardiac unit waiting room." When I found the waiting room, I saw my mother sitting beside a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Robert made in a month. When Mom saw me, she stood up quickly, her face flushed with guilt and something else I couldn't identify. "Michael, this is James Morrison." She gestured to the man, who stood and extended his hand. "James, this is my son." James Morrison looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom. His handshake was firm, confident, and his smile had the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to making good impressions. Everything about him, from his perfectly styled hair to his Italian leather shoes, spoke of wealth and success. "I've heard so much about you, Michael. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." I stared at him, then at my mother. "Where's Robert? How is he?" "He's in surgery," Mom said softly. "They're doing an angioplasty. The doctor says his chances are good." "Can I see him?" "Not yet. But Michael, we need to talk." That's when she told me the story I never wanted to hear. My mother and James Morrison had met in college, at the University of Colorado, long before she'd ever moved to Denver with me. They'd been together for 2 years, planning to get married after graduation. But James came from money, old Denver money, and his family had made it clear that a girl from small-town Michigan wasn't suitable for their son's future. Under pressure from his family, James had broken up with Mom just weeks before graduation, leaving her heartbroken and, as it turned out, pregnant. She'd returned to Michigan, met Robert at that 4th of July barbecue, and never told him the truth about who had fathered the baby she was carrying. "I was 19 and scared," Mom explained, her eyes filling with tears. "Robert was so good to me, so ready to step up and be a father. I convinced myself it was better this way." James had spent the intervening years building a business empire, real estate and development, becoming one of Denver's most successful entrepreneurs. He'd married someone from his social circle, had 2 children, and lived the life his family had mapped out for him. But he'd never forgotten Sarah. "I hired a private investigator 5 years ago to find her," James said, his voice heavy with regret. "I wanted to make things right, to be part of your life." "So you broke up my parents' marriage?" The words came out harder than I intended. Mom flinched. "Michael, it wasn't like that. James and I reconnected, and we realized we still loved each other. We tried to stay away from each other, but it was impossible." "How long?" I asked. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years. While I was building my career and starting my family, while Robert was working overtime to help us buy our house in Sacramento, while he was building that crib for David and talking about retirement, my mother had been carrying on an affair. "Does Robert know?" "Yes," she said simply. "I told him last month. I filed for divorce 2 weeks ago." The waiting room felt like it was spinning. I sat down hard in one of the plastic chairs, trying to process everything. My father, the man who had raised me, taught me everything I knew about being a decent human being, was lying in surgery while my mother sat beside the man she'd chosen over him. I want to see him, I said. Michael, you need to understand. I want to see Robert. Now. A nurse eventually told us that visiting hours wouldn't begin until morning, but that Robert was stable and resting comfortably. I checked into a hotel near the hospital, refusing Mom's offer to stay at her new place, wherever that was. That night, I called Jennifer and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. How do you feel about James being your biological father? I don't know, I admitted. All I know is that Robert is my dad. Biology doesn't change that. But your mom might expect you to have a relationship with James. Right now, all I care about is Robert. The next morning, I was at the hospital before visiting hours officially began. The nurse recognized me from the night before and let me slip into Robert's room early. He was awake, looking pale but alert, with monitoring wires snaking across his chest. When he saw me, his face lit up with the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. Hey there, pilot. I hear you flew in for the show. I sat down beside his bed, taking his hand. It felt smaller than I remembered, friendlier, but still warm and familiar. How are you feeling? Like I got kicked by a mule, but the doctor says I'll live. He paused, studying my face. Your mother told you. It wasn't a question. Why didn't you ever say anything? Robert was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the Colorado mountains. What was I supposed to say? That the baby I'd raised from birth, taught to ride a bike, cheered for at every football game, wasn't biologically mine? You think that would have made you love me more? It wouldn't have mattered. I know that now. But back then, I was scared. Scared you'd want to find your real father. Scared you'd see me differently. You are my real father. His eyes filled with tears. I've loved you every day since the moment you were born, Michael. Loved you like you came from my own blood. That's never going to change, no matter what any DNA test says. We talked for an hour before Mom and James arrived. I watched Robert's face change when he saw them together, saw the way James instinctively moved protectively closer to Mom. There was hurt there, and resignation, but also a kind of dignity that made me proud to be his son. Robert, James said, approaching the bed. I'm glad you're all right. James. Robert's voice was neutral, polite. Thank you for getting Sarah here safely. The conversation was stilted, awkward, full of the weight of 26 years of secrets. I stayed for another hour, then told Robert I'd be back later. In the hallway, Mom caught up with me. Michael, I know this is a shock, but I hope you'll give James a chance. He's a good man. I'm sure he is. But right now, I need to focus on Robert. He's going to be fine. The doctors are very optimistic. That's not what I mean. She looked confused. Mom, you left him. After 26 years, after everything he's done for us, you just left him. It's complicated. No, it's not. It's actually pretty simple. He loved you, and he loved me, and you threw that away for someone who abandoned you when it mattered. Her face flushed. You don't understand what it's like to live without real love. I understand exactly what real love looks like. I saw it every day growing up. Robert working double shifts to pay for my flight lessons. Robert driving 12 hours to Colorado Springs every other month so he could see me. Robert learning to ski at 40 so he could take me to Winter Park. That's real love, Mom. Not whatever this is. I walked away before she could respond. Over the next few days, as Robert recovered, I split my time between the hospital and researching James Morrison. What I found was impressive and disturbing in equal measure. He was indeed one of Denver's most successful developers, worth somewhere north of $50 million. He'd built half the luxury condos in downtown Denver, owned restaurants and retail spaces throughout the Front Range. He was also married. When I confronted Mom about this, she looked uncomfortable. He's separated. Has been for 6 months. Because of you? It's complicated, Michael. Everything was complicated, according to Mom. But from where I sat, it looked pretty straightforward. James Morrison had a pattern of abandoning women when things got difficult, and my mother was too blinded by his money and charm to see it. Robert was released from the hospital after 5 days. I drove him to his apartment, a modest one-bedroom place he'd rented after Mom asked for the divorce. It was furnished with pieces from their old house mixed with items from garage sales, and it broke my heart to see how he tried to make it homey. This is nice, I lied, looking around at the small living room. It's temporary, Robert said. I'm thinking about moving back to Michigan. Closer to my sister. The thought of him leaving Colorado, leaving the life he'd built here, was unbearable. What about your job? I can retire early, take the pension. It won't be much, but it'll be enough. We spent the weekend together, driving around Colorado Springs, visiting places that held memories. The baseball field where he'd coached Little League. The diner where we'd eaten breakfast after my high school graduation. The park where he'd taught me to throw a football. On Sunday evening, as I prepared to fly back to California, Robert pulled me aside. I want you to know something, Michael. Whatever happens with your mother, whatever relationship you choose to have with James Morrison, you'll always be my son. Nothing can change that. You'll always be my dad. But I also want you to consider giving James a chance. He's your biological father, and he seems to genuinely want a relationship with you. This was Robert at his finest, thinking about my well-being even when his own world was falling apart. I'll think about it. But I'd already made my decision. When I got back to Sacramento, I threw myself into work and family. Jennifer could tell something had shifted in me, but I couldn't articulate what it was. All I knew was that I felt an urgent need to be the kind of father to David that Robert had been to me. Mom called regularly, updating me on Robert's health and dropping hints about James wanting to meet his grandson. I kept the conversation short and polite, but I wasn't ready for family reconciliation. 3 months after Robert's heart attack, Mom called with different news. Robert's getting married. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What? To Linda Hendricks. She's a nurse at the hospital where he had his surgery. They've been dating for 2 months. 2 months? That's fast. I thought you should know. The wedding is next month. I hung up and immediately called Robert. Dad, is it true? Are you getting married? He laughed, and I could hear happiness in his voice for the first time since his heart attack. I am. Linda's a good woman, Michael. She makes me feel young again. 2 months seems quick. At my age, why wait? Life's too short, and I've learned not to take good things for granted. There was a subtle message there, one that wasn't lost on me. I flew to Colorado for the wedding, bringing Jennifer and David. It was a small ceremony at a local church, with Linda's family, a few friends from the plant, and some of Robert's neighbors. Linda was in her 50s, with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, and she looked at Robert like he was the most important person in the world. During the reception at a local community center, Robert pulled me aside. Thank you for being here. I wouldn't miss it. Linda's excited to meet David properly. She's always wanted to be a grandmother. I watched Linda playing with David, showing him how to make animals out of napkins, and felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in months. This was what a family should look like, people choosing to love each other, building something good together. Mom and James didn't attend the wedding. After the reception, as Jennifer and I prepared to leave for our hotel, Linda approached me. Michael, I want you to know how much Robert talks about you. You're the light of his life. He's pretty special to me too. I hope you'll visit often. We'd love to have you and your family anytime. Standing there in that church fellowship hall, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about each other, I realized what I'd been missing. This was family. Not the complicated web of secrets and wealth that Mom had chosen, but the simple, honest love of people who showed up for each other. Over the next 2 years, I visited Robert and Linda regularly. David adored his step-grandmother, and she spoiled him shamelessly, teaching him to bake cookies and taking him to children's museums whenever we visited. Robert seemed younger, happier, more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. Meanwhile, Mom's relationship with James grew more complicated. His divorce became contentious, with his ex-wife demanding half of everything. Mom found herself caught in the middle of financial disputes and custody battles over James's teenage children, who wanted nothing to do with her. She called me less frequently, and when she did, she sounded tired and stressed. James is under a lot of pressure with the divorce, she'd explain when I asked how she was doing. Maybe you should step back until things settle down. I can't abandon him now. He needs me. It was ironic, hearing her talk about not abandoning someone, but I kept that observation to myself. The breaking point came during Christmas 2024. Jennifer was pregnant with our second child, and we'd planned to spend the holidays in Colorado Springs with Robert and Linda. Mom called on Christmas Eve. I was hoping you'd come to Denver for Christmas dinner. James's children will be there, and I think it would be good for you to meet them. We already have plans with Dad and Linda. Robert isn't your father, Michael. The words hung in the air between us like a slap. Yes, he is. Biologically. I don't care about biology. He raised me. He loved me. He's been there for every important moment of my life. That makes him my father. You're being stubborn. I'm being loyal. You should try it sometime. It was the last conversation we had for 6 months. In March 2025, Jennifer gave birth to our daughter, Emma. Robert and Linda flew out to California to meet her, and Robert held her with the same gentle wonder he'd shown with David. Another beautiful grandchild, he whispered, tears in his eyes. I'm the luckiest man alive. Mom learned about Emma's birth from Jennifer's Facebook post. In July, everything changed again. I was preparing for a flight to London when my phone rang. It was Linda, and she was crying. Michael, it's your father. He's had another heart attack. This time, Robert didn't make it. The funeral was held at the same church where he and Linda had gotten married. The sanctuary was packed with people from the plant, neighbors, kids he'd coached in Little League, and fellow veterans from his Air Force days. Person after person stood up to talk about Robert's kindness, his work ethic, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. I gave the eulogy, talking about the man who taught me to be a father, a husband, and a decent human being. I talked about his sacrifice, his loyalty, and his capacity for love that had nothing to do with blood relations and everything to do with choice. Mom attended the funeral, sitting in the back with James. She approached me after the service. Michael, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. I hope now you might be willing to consider a relationship with James. Life's too short for family divisions. I looked at her, this woman who'd thrown away 26 years of marriage for a man who still hadn't finalized his divorce, who'd missed the birth of her granddaughter, who'd just referred to my father's death as my loss instead of ours. You're right, Mom. Life is too short. Too short to waste on people who don't understand what family really means. I walked away and didn't look back. Jennifer and I inherited Robert's house, which Linda had insisted we take. He would want David and Emma to have roots here, she said. And I want to stay close to you kids. We decided to move to Colorado Springs, where I could transfer to Denver International Airport and Jennifer could work part-time. It felt right, raising our children in the place where Robert had been happiest. As I write this, David is 4 years old and Emma is 6 months old. David calls Linda grandma and tells everyone who'll listen about his grandpa Robert who went to heaven but still watches over him. Sometimes I wonder about the other path, the one where I embraced James Morrison as my father and became part of his wealthy world. I imagine family vacations to Europe, private school educations for my children, and all the opportunities that money can buy. But then I watch David playing in the same backyard where Robert taught me to throw a curveball, and I know I made the right choice. Real fatherhood isn't about DNA or money or social status. It's about showing up, day after day, year after year, with patience and love and the quiet determination to raise good human beings. Robert Patterson may not have been my biological father, but he was my dad in every way that mattered. And that's a legacy no amount of money can buy. The last time I spoke to Mom was 6 months ago, when she called to tell me that James's divorce had finally been finalized and they were planning to get married. "I hope you'll be there," she said. "I hope you'll be happy," I replied. "But I won't be there. I'll be here, in the house that love built, raising my children the way Robert raised me, with consistency, sacrifice, and the understanding that family is something you create through choice, not something you inherit through chance." That's the real story, the one worth telling, how a man who didn't have to love me chose to anyway, and how that choice made all the difference in the world.